this afternoon. So I guess Avram couldn't handle it.
There was a lot of heckling.
There usually is. Okay, so we are up to the Gemara on Daf Yud Gimel Amud Beis, all the way to the bottom. It's a very technical Gemara because we're just learning. We're going through every halacha in the Mishnah and figuring out where all these kinyanim come from. What are the makar? Oh, good morning, Shmuel. Thank you.
Good morning. I also have the other regular Sunday morning guy here.
Oh, Reb Shimon's here?
Yeah, he's there. He's about to get a coffee.
Oh, okay. Wait, so the problem is then are they Avram Weishman didn't finish the daf yesterday. He only got up to the top of Amud Beis, right?
Yeah.
So is that where I should start from?
I guess.
Okay, Reb David. We got outnumbered.
All right.
We got outnumbered.
I don't mind the Chazara.
Okay, so let me start then from the top of Amud Beis. We'll get started right away because
he was trying to copy you yesterday. Tell her some jokes.
Oh.
I get into some long
How were
stories.
they received?
Not bad, actually. He told her a good one. He said there was a Bachman by his son's wedding in Antwerp, who they had Belgian Hasidim there and they had Ger Hasidim there, and he was going after the Ger Hasidim like no tomorrow. This guy was a Belgian. He said, so why is myself? I enjoyed it, even though I'm a Ger Hasid. I still like the Nufis. They like making fun of themselves, right? So he said over that he once tried to make fun of the Belgian Hasidim, and they had to carry him out on a stretcher.
Shmuel could have costed him $20,000.
That's right.
Okay. That's right. So what we were learning is after Abasi passed away. Good morning, Reb Shimon. After Reb Asi passed away, his Talmidim got together. I guess they wanted to print a kuntrus of Torah that Reb Asi said. So they were all sharing what they learned from Reb Asi. And the first halacha that was shared with us that Reb Asi said was that just like you could not use Kinyan Kessef, Kiddushin Kessef, to be koine in Isha, if it's less than a pruta, so too if you use Kinyan Kessef to be koine a soda, it has to be at least a pruta. The second limud that Rabasi taught us was that a dayan that wants to be active in paskening shilas related to Kiddushin and Gerushin better know his information thoroughly in great detail, because if not, he's going to cause more damage to Klal Yisrael than the Mabul did. And that's what we end off with at the top of Amud Beis. It says Mi Ksivu Partzu Ksiv, meaning that the pasuk seems to separate all the other aveiros that the pasuk discusses, and the aveira of destroying Klal Yisrael be Isurei Arayis. And then the next pasuk is referring to that last aveira of Arayis, which is caused by dayanim who don't know what they're doing in these halachas and paskin anyway, and on that it says that the world will be destroyed. Hadu Yosy the Kamri. Then there was another halacha that was brought down in the name of Abasi. Haditnan. A woman who was a yeledes. A woman who's a yeledes has a chiyuv to bring a chatos first, followed by an oila. And the woman separated already her chatos and separated her oila. The two animals are here. She was makriv her chatos and Rachmana litzlan before they were makriv the oila. She passed away. Umesa. So the halach is yaviu yarshin eilasa. The animals is already here. The yarshin bring the carbon oila. Amar B'Yehuda Mishmul. So B'Yehuda Mishmul said, "V'hu shefrishasa mechan." If she has already designated an animal, and this animal is already the oila, it's ready to go, and she dies, then they bring it to the Beis Hamikdash and they makriv it. Avoloi frishasa mechan. What if she never separated an animal from her assets? Loi, then you would not. The Yorshim are not mechuyev to bring the carbon oila. The Torah put a chiyuv to bring an oila upon this woman. Why don't we say that the chiyuv that's incumbent upon her creates a lien on her assets, and therefore her animals, all of her assets are meshubed to pay off this mandated debt that the Torah gave her to bring a carbon oil. You see that that's not the case because her Yorshim don't have to bring a carbon oil from her estate. This clearly shows us Shmuel that Shibuda is lav da'iraisa, or Shmuel's psak clearly shows us that Shmuel holds Shibuda lav da'iraisa. If someone has a personal chiyuv, whether it is to pay a debt to the Torah, such as a chiyuv to bring an oila, or even if a person borrowed money from somebody, so now he's personally indebted to the malva, that doesn't automatically create a lien on his nechosim to pay that debt. So although he has to pay the debt while he's alive, if he dies, there is no remnant left to that debt, and therefore the Yorshim do not have to take from the estate and pay it off. Amar Abasi, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan argues and he holds, even though she was not mafresh the oil while she was alive, her assets are mishubed to any chiyuv that she had, and therefore alma kasaver shibuda hava deraisa. You see, Rabbi Yochanan's position, unlike Shmuel, is that shibuda deraisa, which would then translate into a regular debt. If a loiva borrows money from a malva, his nechasim are automatically leaned to pay back that chayv, and if he dies, the malva can come and collect from his nechasim. Why do I need the Gemara here to share with us this machloikus between Shmuel and Rabbi Yochanan as to whether or not Shibuda Daraisa? This is an old story. We already know this machloikus. The Rav and Shmuel, Darmi Tarvayu, Rav and Shmuel both agreed. Milval peh eina goyvim in ayorshim. A milval peh, you don't have a right. The malva doesn't have a right to collect from the estate if the loiva dies, but loimin alakuchos, and not from the kuchos, because Shibuda lav doiraisa. Rabbi Yochanan verse Lakish Darmi Tarvayu, milval peh goyve bein min ayorshim bein min alakuchos, because they hold Shibuda doiraisa. So why do I need our Gemara to illustrate this machlokes related to her the chiyuv of a yoledis to bring a carbon oila? We already know this machlokes related to a loiv and a malva, which is the identical shaila. Is a person's assets leaned to pay back any liability that he has? Zaktamor Tricha, we need to learn this machlokes by the carbon of a yoledis, but we also need to know that there's a machlokes with a regular malva and a loiv. The itmer bahach, if we only knew the story of the machlokes by a regular malva and a loiva, bahach amar Shmuel, it's only there does Rav and Shmuel say shibuda lav daraisa. You know why? Mishum de lav milva ksuva b'torah. This milva is merely created. This liability was merely created by someone's personal actions. It's not the king telling someone you must pay, which is much more severe. So maybe when you create your own liability because you borrowed money, there we don't say that your assets are leaned. But when the Torah, when the Rebbeinu Shalom comes and says you must bring a carbon, maybe that's much more serious, and maybe that will create a lien on your property. Avul bahach, but maybe in the case of carbon, maybe Rav and Shmuel would agree that Shibuda is Dairaisa when it comes to a milva that the Torah places upon you. But if we only learned the machlokes by the case of carbon, then I would say the opposite. The Hakam Rabbi Yochanan, the milva suva b'Torah k'suva b'shtardami. Only by a chiyuv that was mandated by the Rebbeinu Shalom, that creates a lien. Avu bahach, but your own personal liability that you created by borrowing money, maybe Rabbi Yochanan or Shloko should agree that over there you don't say shibuda daraisa. Tzricha, that's why the machlokes had to be shared with us, both related to a carbon as well as related to a personal loan. Amar Papa, what's halacha l'maisa? Hilchas milva al peh goyvim in a yarshim ve'ina goyvim al kuchos. So he splits it. It is goyvim in a yarshim, which would indicate shibuda daraisa, yet it's not goyvim from the kuchos. If my nechasim are meshubed, why may I not collect from the kuchos? Zokt Rav Papa goyvim in a yarshim because he holds shibuda daraisa. But ve'ina goyvim in al kuchos, the less like kala. Me'ikra din, even a milva peh, you should be able to seize assets from the lekuchos. However, that puts the lekuchos at a terrible disadvantage because they'll never be able to buy any type of property securely because they always need to worry maybe there's a lien on it that's untraceable. So therefore, the Chazal made a gzeira that we do not allow a malva to collect from lekuchos if it was a milva peh, because lekuchos then will not want to buy properties. It'll destroy the real estate market because people will always be afraid of the potential liability. But if there's a milva b'shtar, which creates a rumor, there the lekuchos can be careful. There they'll be able to find out about it doing a title search. And therefore, there we will allow the malva to seize assets from the lekuchos because there's no danger to them. But to allow them to collect from the lekuchos, no matter what, that we wouldn't do because that would destroy the property market. So it seems that the default psak is that shibuda dairaisa. Frek Tosfos that in the Gemara Bava Basra, Rav Papa said exactly the opposite. And Rav Papa said was, Milva al Peh is goyvim in a Yorshim for a separate reason. Really, Milva al Peh should not be able to be goyvim in Yorshim because shibuda lav dairaisa. But the Rabbanan made a takana that Milva al Peh can be goyvim from the Yorshim shaloitinel delas b'fnei lovin. If I know that I could never collect from the Yorshim, I won't want to lend money. So therefore, the default is shibuda lav dairaisa, but there's a special takana that allows a malva to collect from the Yorshim. But you know why a malva cannot collect from the lekuchos by a milva peh? The shibuda lav dairaisa. So we have a steer in Rav Papa. Is the default shibuda dairaisa? Is the default shibuda lav dairaisa? Zok Tosfos Rav Papa comes up the middle. We said there's a distinction between a milva al peh, a regular milva, which the thought is maybe there should not be shibuda dairaisa because that's self-generated, versus a chiyuv that the Torah places on you, such as the chiyuv for your letters to bring a carbon. Maybe there you say shibuda dairaisa. Zok Tosfos, our Gemara that says Rav Papa as a default paskin shibuda dairaisa, that's speaking about a carbon, about a chiyuv that the Torah placed upon you. There he paskin shibuda dairaisa, and the reason why you're not going from lekuchos is the less lekala. But when it comes to a regular milva, there Rav Papa paskin that shibuda is lav dairaisa. And the only reason why you could collect by a milva peh from the Yorshim is shaloitinal delas b'fnei lovin. Gewaltig. Zok to Gemara weiter, the kindness atzma beget uvamisas abal. There's two ways for a woman to be kind herself back from the reshus of her husband, either through a get or if her husband dies. Frek to Gemara bishlam a get, and this daf was on steroids, an example of the Lublina strikes again, because we have multiple psukim on this daf that the Gemara refers to psukim in Parshas Kiseitze. So let's see what we have. The first one is the Chesiv v'chasav law sefer krisos. It's mufresh in the Torah, the heter for a woman using a get. Alamisis abal minola. How do we know that if a husband dies, that frees a woman completely? Zok Gemara svarahu. That's logical. Who asur v'sharsa. He is the one who put an isser on her. If he's no longer alive, then the isser automatically will dissolve. For Gemara, I'll show you a precedent where someone can place an isser on a woman, and even though he dies, the isser remains. And I'll give you a typical example. My father's brother, if he marries a woman, that woman becomes usher to me because she's my aunt. But if my father's brother dies and he's not around anymore, my aunt is still usher to me. So for Gemara Varai is the usher lahu, v'lo shari lahu. My uncle ushered this woman to me by marrying her, and even after he dies, the issur remains. So to every eshes, even though the husband dies, the woman should remain usher. Ella, let's try another makar that Misas Abal frees a woman completely. With Omer Achmona, the Torah taught us that Yevama Shein Labanim Asura. Once again, this is Lublina strikes again because the Parsha of Yibum was also in Kiseitze. A Yevama who has no children is usher to marry any other man except for the Oven. Ha-yesh labanim, mashma, if she had children and there was no zik of Yibum, muter, she would be muter to everybody. So this is a makar that Mises Abal frees a woman completely. Zok Gemara, no such thing. V'dilma ein labanim asur la'alma v'sharliya. If she has no children, then she's usher to the world and she's only muter to the Oven. However, v'yesh labanim, but if she has children, luchula almanami asura, she will remain usher to everybody. So that's not a good source that Misas Abal is matter a woman. So let's try another halach. The Torah tells us that the only man that an almana may not marry is a kohen gadol. Everybody else she could marry. So that right away tells us that the Misas Abal allows a woman to remarry. Halakohen hedid shari. Zakt Gemara, no, you don't have a right either, because the dilma kohen gadol b'lav. Maybe it's also for an almana to marry a kohen gadol with a lav. It says almana ugerusha v'chalala zoyna. I say la lo yikach. There's a lav, but l'chula amabasei. But for everybody else, a woman whose husband died, a widow, has an isser asay to marry every other man. So the question here is, where do we find in the Torah an isser asay to marry once a woman loses her husband? So Rashi and Tosfos each offer a pshat, and the Ritva says something remarkable about the pshat that Rashi and Tosfos say. So let's first look in Rashi what this lav is. Rashi says the lav is l'chula amabasei. Zok Rashi, the asay is v'yotza v'hoisa le'ishacher. It says that she will leave her by a case of a get. Once again, the Lublina strikes again. This is Parshas Kisetzi. V'yotza v'hoisa le'ishacher. After she receives the get, she can go marry somebody else. And we learn al yidei gerushin. Dafka al yidei gerushin is she allowed to remarry, v'loy al yidei misa, but not through misa. Why do we have that view? Because it says v'shilcha. V'shilcha mi beisoy. If he sends her away, which is the heter of gerushin, lezu v'loy lacheres, but not if he dies. Mashma. That's how it's mashma. And therefore, v'laf abo mechlal asay asay. V'shilcha is, the shilcha says this only applies to a get, and dafke by a get is v'yotzav ha'isal l'shacher. Mashma, that if it's through misas abal, there's no heter of v'yotzav ha'isal l'shacher. Halav abo mechal asay is an asay. That's Rashi's opinion of where you would find an isra asay. Tosfos has a different opinion. Tosfos says l'chulam abasay oimeri l'ika asay ve'eshashish kegoin v'dovak be'ishtoi v'loi be'eshes chaver. Zok the Ritva, it's shocking that this is what the Ritva says, but I'm not the Ritva. The Ritva says, Elu ve'elu divrei havoinin. It's foolishness. It's nonsense what Rashi and Tosfos are saying. And the reason why he says that it's nonsense is because if these are legitimate asay, we know halacha l'maisa, a woman who's an almana is completely mutter. We know halacha l'maisa, Mrs. Abal is completely matter a woman. So what are we going to do now with these two isra asayis? The Gemara never deals with them. But according to Rashi, there's a legit isra asay. Zok the Ritva, b'meila Tosfos, you can forever. The Davak Bishta is only referring to an Eishashish by a Benoach. That there's a mitzvah of Davak Ishta. But the Yotzav Oisa with this Israel say, what if it's in fact legit Israel say? So how does the Gemara neutralize that once the Gemara comes to the conclusion that Misas Abal completely heals? And therefore the Ritva says when the Gemara suggested L'chula Alma Basei, it didn't really mean there's an Israel say. It just means maybe there's some prohibition. The lightest, most benign type of prohibition that we're aware of is an assay. Because it's not allowed, so a lighter isser would be an isser assay. So all the Gemara is suggesting is maybe the Misas Abal doesn't completely matter her, maybe there's still some isser. What exactly is that isser? We'll compare it to an isser assay, but not that we actually have a pasuk that's going to create an isser assay. Zokt Gemara, it cannot be an Isra Asay, and I'll tell you why. Because Hayasay Mayavidite. Exactly where is this Isra Asay popping up from? Ida Hanya Mrs. Abal, if Mrs. Abal ends the previous relationship, well, then the previous relationship had with it the Oynish of Misa. If that was dissolved, Tishtri Lagamri. She should be mutter completely. Where does this new Isra Asay pop up? It wasn't here until now. And Ida Loya Hanya Mrs. Abal. And if you're telling me that Mrs. Abal is not effective in eliminating that relationship, then tukma b'milsa kamaisa. Let her remain a regular relationship with the chiv misa if she's mizana. Dr. Gemara, that's not an argument. It's possible that the misa accomplishes a partial release and it releases the chiv misa, but there's still some type of iser. Alam aloi, afiktim a misa, v'ukim talasei. Why can't you say it did that? And we have a precedent. Midi to have absolute mikdoshim. The law is if you have a carbon that becomes a balmum, you redeem it. What happens during the redemption? Zok the Gemara, I'll tell you exactly what happens. The Meikara, before you redeem it, Ispahu Me'ila, if you have enough of it, there's a Chiv Me'ila, and you're not allowed to make Giza Avoida, and you're not allowed to eat it, you're not allowed to have enough of it. But per Kinu, once you replied it, Me'il Lasbu, there's no more Me'ila, but the Giza of Avoida Asiri. It's also to do Giza of Avoida on the animal, you're only allowed to shecht it and eat it. So you see that a partial Isser remains, even though it had the heter of pigeon. So why don't you say the same thing? Misas Abal will take away the Chiv Misa, but there's still an Isser remaining. Ella, we're going to have to find another Makar. How do we know that Misas Abal is matter a woman Lagansin? Ella Mida Amar, another Lublin strikes again, because another reference to a pasuk in Parshas Kisei. If a man is freshly married, he doesn't go to war, because the pasuk says, so you see clearly that if he dies b'milchama, an ish acher may in fact marry her. So this is a makar that Misas Habal is mater a woman. Who said this ish acher is a stranger? Maybe this acher is her brother-in-law. And what the pasuk means is, if her husband dies and there's no children, the ish acher shall do evil. But if she has children, maybe she's not much to anybody. I'm going to prove to you with two different arguments that Misas Habal is mater. Chada, the Yovim lo yikriach. If the pasuk was referring to a Yovim, when her husband dies, she'd have to marry a Yovim, it wouldn't say Pen Yamas b'Muchama Bish Acher Yikachena, which has the connotation that it's someone from the big world out there. If it's referring to a specific person who's going to marry her, meaning her brother-in-law, the Torah wouldn't have used the nusach of Ish Acher. Ish Acher clearly indicates she's marrying any other man, which clearly shows us that Misas Habal is mater a woman completely. But there's another pasuk that will also be a makar for Misas Habal. Void ksiv, and again we're bringing from a pasuk in Parshas Kisei. It says Usneya ha'isha achrei. In the Parsha of Gershon, the Torah discusses what if the second husband marries her after she was divorced from her first husband, and the second husband also doesn't like her, and therefore the second husband will be the chasav la sefer krisus. The second husband either divorced her, or if he dies. So the Torah is comparing the impact of a get from the second husband to the death of the second husband. The ishkas misa legerishin, ma gerishin shari vigomeres. Just like a gerishin, not only is it matter her, it makes he completely mutter to marry any other man. Af misa shari vigomeres. So to misa not only will be matter her from the chiv misa, it's completely matter her to marry anyone she wants. So the maskana hasadover is, how do we know that Misas Habal is mater a woman? It's either from Penyamis b'Milchama v'Shachar Yikochena, or it's from the Chasav La Sefer Krisus or Chiyamis Ha'ish Achrein. Those are the two sources where we know that Misas Habal is mater a woman. Va'Yavama Niknas B'Biyah. Yavama, how is one kaina Yavama with Biyah? The fact Gemara B'Biyah Minola. How do we know that you're kaina Yavama with Biyah? Omar Kra, the Torah tells us, and now we're going to turn over onto today's daf, which is daf Yudalid Amid Aleph. Oops. Amar Kra, the pasuk says, Yavama Yavai Aleha. The Yavama should make biyah, and that's how he's koiner. So Rashi says, Klemer bi'asa, being boiled the Yavama, hein likucha, is the method with which one is koiner Yavama. Frek the Gemara, ve'ema l'chula mil sakisha. Once we learn that Bia works, maybe we should learn that a Yavama is exactly like the Isha, and you should be able to be kind of Yavama with Kessef and Shtar as well. That's not logical. The Tanya we learned in the Brisa, Yachal you Kessef Shtar Goimrim Ba, Kederech Shabia Goimeris Ba. You would have thought that Kessef and Shtar works for Yavama, just like Bia does. Talmud Loimer, V'yibma. The Torah says Yavama Yaveh Allah v'yibma. V'yibma Rashi says is mashma bia gemerisba vein Kessef u'shtar goimrimba. The only thing that creates a full Kinyan for a Yavama is bia, not Kessef and shtar. Frekt Gemara ve'imamai v'yibma the Baal Korcha miyabim. How do you know from v'yibma you learn that dafka bia works and not anything else? Maybe the lesson from v'yibma is that it even works Baal Korcha. Zok to Gemara, if that was the case, im kain le'mikra v'yibim, my v'yibma, there's an extra place to learn an extra piece of information from. Shmas min atarti that sai yibim works Baal Korcha, and sai the only way to be kind of Yavama is with a bia. Zok to Gemara weiter. B'chalitza, we know that the way to discharge a zika is with a chalitza. Frek to Gemara minala. How do we know that fact? The Chesef says in the pasuk, "V'nikra shmoi b'Yisrael beis chalutzanal." Once again, this is a pasuk in Parshas Kiseitze. "V'nikra shmoi b'Yisrael beis chalutzanal." After the chalitza is over, the pasuk says this place will be called beis chalutzanal. And we darshan kivin shechalatz ba now putra l'chol Yisrael. So we darshan the pasuk is Yisrael beis chalutz. Once she is Rashi Yisrael beis chalutz hachi mashma Yisrael rui lahavi lebayis mishachalta. She's royal to be married to any Yisrael once the chalitza is done. Kivin shechalutz ba now hutra l'chol Yisrael. Freit the Gemara, hi Yisrael, are you telling me the Nikra be Yisrael based chalutz? The word Yisrael is to teach you that chalitza is matter, which is be Yisrael, bevezin shall Yisrael, v'loy bevezin shall Gerim. The Bach and the other Mefarshim changed the Gish shall Gerim. The bezdin cannot be a bezdin of Gerim; it has to be a bezdin of Yidin. Zok to Gemara, that's not a problem, because Trey be Yisrael ksivi. There's two psukim that says be Yisrael in the parsha of Yibum and Chalitza. One will be to tell us be Yisrael beis chalutz, to tell us that she's mutter once she receives Chalitza, and the other one will tell us that the bezdin has to be a bezdin of Yisraelim and not a bezdin of Gerim. Frek Gemara, but we still have another limud that we need a pasuk for. We were once sitting in front of Reb Tarfon, and Yavama came to receive Chalitza, and he told us after the process, Anu kulchem v'amru, you should all say Chalutza now, because it says in the pasuk you have to call it base Chalutza now. So he wanted the spectators to all make that proclamation. This is Chalutza now. Dr. Gemara, that you don't learn from Yisrael. That you learn from V'nikra Shemai, so we have enough psukim to tell us whatever we need, and we're going to be able to learn the drasha of Yisrael beis chalutz, that she's mutter to any bias in Yisrael through chalitza. If the Yavim dies, this woman also has no more zika, and she could now marry anybody. Minalon, how do we know that? That is a kal v'chomer. She bechenek. If she's mezana, she gets capital punishment. Yet Mises Abal is enough to discharge that isser. Yavama shibalav. A Yavama, if she's mezana, the zika only is an isser lav, so it's a much weaker bond. Loy calls again. Surely Mises Abal should discharge that. Zoktima, you don't have a riot. Ma leisha shish to ken yoytze beget. The bond of Esha Shish has a different weakness, because it can be discharged with a get. A Yavama doesn't have the weakness that a Zika can be discharged with a get. Zokt Gemara, true, but Hanami Yotze b'chalitza. Yavama has a different weakness. It has a weakness that it goes out with chalitza, which an Esha Shish cannot go out with. So Zokt Gemara, we're still going to slug it up. Elamala Esha Shish shekain oisra matira. By the Esha Shish, who is being mad to her? The very man that asked her. He married her. That's why there's an Isra Eshish. So when he dies, that will discharge it. Masha Enken Yibum, the Gemara wants to suggest the Zika comes as a residual remnant of the original marriage of her first husband. So therefore, how could the death of the second guy, the Yavim, release a Isser that stems, that's the remnants of an earlier relationship? Zok to Gemara, you're making a wrong assumption. You're assuming Zika is a remnant of the previous relationship of a related husband? Absolutely not. Zok to Gemara, that's not how it works. That's not how it works. Zok to Gemara, Hanami Oisra Matira. Yavim Oisra, Yavim Sharila. The Zika has nothing to do with the first husband, and it's not a remnant of the relationship that she had that her husband died. Rather, it's a brand new Zika that the Torah creates that exists with the Yavim. And therefore, it's logical to suggest that if the Yavim dies, the woman should be mutter because of the Kal V'chomer. Madich Mitzas Habal is matter Isser Chenek and Isser Mitzah, Hoshgein should be able to be matter in Isser Lav. Zok to Gemara, why don't we say, using the Kal V'chomer, that chalitza works just like a get, and it should be matter and ishishish. And that's up to Gemara. Amakra Sefer Krisos. We have a special pasuk once again in Parshas Kiseitze that tells us Dafka get is matter a woman l'shuk. Sefer Karsa the ein davar achar Karsa. There's no other method to free a woman from her husband. So let's turn it around. Let's bring a raya from get that it should work to free a yavam as well. That doesn't have the yitzi of chalitza. Yoitza beget does have the yitzi of get. A yavama who has the yitzi of chalitza ein din sheyoitza beget. Surely a get should also break the zika of a yavama. And that the Gemara says, Amar Kra, Tacha. It says by Chalita, Kacha Yashal Ish, Ashelo Yivna Beis Achiv. Dafka Chalitza works, but no other release works. Get won't work. The Kacha Ikuva. And the word Kacha is mashma that Dafka this and not anything else. Correct the Gemara, are you suggesting that when the Torah says Kacha or any other Lashon that says Dafka this, you wouldn't be able to add something else using a Kal V'chomer, which is one of the Shloshes Midas Shatar in the Drashas Ben? Maybe a Kal V'chomer will trump an Ikov. Are you suggesting that when you have such a miyut, it won't even be neutralized with a Kal V'chomer? What about the karbonos that are brought on Yom Kippur? It says the Chsiv Goyro. How do we determine which is the Sir Lashem and which is the Sir Lazazel with a Goyro? It says Goyro Lechad Lashem, Goyro Lechad Lazazel. And in that parish of Yom Kippur, it says Hukah. It uses a lesson of Chayk, which the Nermitzah is going to bring down the pasuk that quotes the word Chayk. Let me just pull it up so I could quickly quote it. It says as follows: "V'nas nine al shnei hasirim goyrolas goyrolechad Hashem v'goyechad lazazel," and then it says "Vayisayis lehem lechuka asolam." So chuka tells us dafka this and nothing else. So there we have goyrol, which says this is the method of how you determine the Sir Hashem and the Sir Lazazel, and chuka tells you dafka this. Nevertheless, I'm going to show you that there was an attempt to make a Kal V'chomer. So you see, a Kal V'chomer will trump even a pasuk that tells you b'dafka this. Vitanya, where's our Kal V'chomer? It says in the pasuk v'aso chatos. It says again. It says v'hikav aharon es asoyer asher Allah olav hagayr l'Hashem v'aso chatos. From v'aso chatos we learn very important halacha, because as follows: hagayr l'asa chatos ve'ein Hashem oisa chatos. We needed another pasuk to tell you that it could only become a chatos through the goyrel. It already says goyrel echad l'Hashem v'goyrel echad l'Hashem, and it says chukah. I need another pasuk about so chatos. Why? Because shayachal b'aloydinu. I could have made a Kal V'chomer. Shaloi kiddush hagoyrel kiddush Hashem. Madich, when a goyrel doesn't work directly, being mekadosh something as a korban chatos will work. And the example Rashi gives is when a person owes a set of birds, when he buys the birds, he can designate at that point which is going to be the oila and which is going to be the chatos. If he doesn't, then the only next opportunity to designate which bird should be the oila and which should be the chatas is by the kohen when he gives it over to the kohen and the kohen is being marked of them. But no girl in the middle will work. So madach b'makim shalai kiddush girl, where a girl doesn't work. It does work to designate which one is the chatas and which one is the oila. Makim shekiddush girl, but the Karban Shivim Kippur, where the Torah teaches us that a girl does work, surely directly identifying one Hashem should make it into a chatas. And we're making this kal v'chomer in spite of the fact that it says chukah. And that's why we needed a pasuk of baso chatas, Talmud Leimer baso chatas, to counteract that kal v'chomer. So chatas, we learn hagorul oiseh chatas, vein Hashem oiseh chatas. The time of the Ma'atekra. The only reason why we're not making this kal v'chomer is because we have the extra pasuk of baso chatas. Halavachi, if the pasuk wouldn't say baso chatas, dashinin kal v'chomer, I would have made this kal v'chomer. Avagav d'chsiv bechukah, even though it says chukah. So you see from here, even though there's a special word in the Torah like chukah here, or like kacha, like chalitza, with a kal v'chomer, you would overrule that. So therefore, with a kal v'chomer, why don't we learn that get should work to be mater a yavama l'shuk? So Gemara Amakra Allah loy v'loy liyavama. We have a pasuk by Gershon says v'chasav law dafko to a regular shish will the remedy of get work, but it won't work for yavama. So we needed another extra pasuk. Frankly, Gemara v'emal al l'shma. Maybe when it says v'chasav law in the pasuk by Gershon, it's to teach us that the get has to be written l'shma. How could you learn another limud of law that it doesn't work for a yavama? Zaktamar trey law ksivi. It actually says law twice in the pasuk by Gershon. But I need two laws for other halachas. If you have two wives that have exactly the same name, you cannot use the same get for both of them. You need a separate get that was written specifically lishma for that specific woman. Ella Amar Kra, no. We learn it from an extra pasuk by Chalitza where it says no. Nalin media chriniloi. The only way for a Yavama to go l'shuk is using the shoe, which is the method of chalitza. No other method works. Break the Gemara, but we need that pasuk for a different word, for a different limit. Behind now, also, we need it to teach us na'alai. Ainly na'alai. I would think it has to be bidafka, be the shoe of the actual man, the ovein. How about now shokolodah? How about if he uses any other shoe? How do you know that would also work? Do the chalitza process. Now riba. It says now twice. Dr. Gemara imkain ma tamad leimer na'aloi. It does say na'aloi as well. It has to be his shoe. So we have one pasuk that says it could be anyone's shoe. We have another pasuk that says it has to be his shoe. How do these two come together? So we learn na'aloi haroyul. He can use anyone's shoe, but it has to be a shoe that fits him. If the shoe that he wants to use is much too big for him, that wouldn't work for the chalitza. And prat lekatan shein chayfes roiv ragloi. It would also say that a shoe that was too small is also not a shoe that would be matter him, that would work for chalitza because it's not an appropriate shoe for him. And prat lemusulayim, which we're going to turn on to my base to see what that is. Which is a shoe that doesn't have a sole. And when I say sole, it's S-O-L-E, not S-O-U-L. Prat lemusulayim or lemusulam she'ein lo ekev, it doesn't have a proper sole or a heel. So you see, you need these extra nails for that. So how could you use the nail to tell you that dafka chalitza works and not get? So k'morim kei nichtav kra nail. My ha nail, there's a hey. V'nikvish my base called ha nail. The extra hey shmami notarti tells you dafka through a nail, dafka through a chalitza, will a yavama go l'shuk, not through a get. And now we're on.
As far as the shoe having to be his, I attended a chalitza once, many years ago, and they had a designated shoe that really didn't belong to him. It was a shoe, a special chalitza shoe.
That's correct. It doesn't have to belong to him. It just has to be a shoe that'll fit him. So they actually have to, they don't only have one chalitza shoe, they have to have different sizes because it has to fit the person perfectly.
Yeah.
Like they say, if the shoe fits, then you can wear it. And if it doesn't fit, you have to acquit, right? If the glove doesn't fit, then you have to acquit. Okay, Zok to Gemara weiter. Masnisen. Eved Ivri nikta bekesef. How is one coin in Eved Ivri with Kinyan Kessef? Ubishtar and with star. Ubekaina atzmoi. How does an Eved coin himself back? Either Bishonim, once he worked for 6 years, he goes free. Ubiyovel, or when Yovel arrives, or Uvigiroin Kessef by buying himself back with a prorated amount. Yisera Allah of Amma Ivriya. An Amma Ivriya has an additional way to go free that the Eved Ivri does not. Shekoines atzma b'simon. Once she becomes a Gedola, she also goes free. What about an Eved Hanirtza, which is an Eved that the Torah Mishpatim tells us, who says after 6 years, I don't want to go free. I want to remain an Eved. So they drill his ear, his right ear, and he remains an Eved until Yovel. Hanirtza nikna b'ritzia. He's nikna to the Adain until Yovel with Ritzia. The koines has to be Yovel or over Mises Adain. If the Adain dies, he goes free. He doesn't have to work for the Yoshim until Yovel. So there's 3 places in the Torah where the Torah discusses Eved Ivri. It discusses it in Parshas Mishpatim, and that is a pasuk referring to a person who was sold by Bezdin because he stole money and he didn't have the funds with which to pay back, so Bezdin sold him. Then in Vayikra, once again, the Torah discusses an Eved Ivri, but there the Torah is talking about an Ivri who needed money and he sold himself. And then in Devarim, once again, the Torah discusses the Parsha of Eved Ivri, and once again, that Parsha of Eved Ivri is referring to when Bezdin sold him. And all 3 are going to come into play today. Zog the Heilige Gemara. Eved Ivri nikna bekesef minolan. How do we know that an Eved Ivri is nikna bekesef? Amarkar, the pasuk says, "Mi kesef miknosoi." When you want to buy himself back, he pays back prorated. Mi kesef miknosoi. Clearly, he was purchased with kesef malamit nikna bekesef. Ashkan Eved Ivri nikna bekesef. The pasuk of mi kesef miknosoi is in. I believe that's in. Let's see where Mekes Beknasa is. Let's look at the one. That is in Vayikra. So that's referring to when he sold himself to a goy. Because there's 2 parashas, one after the other. One is if he sold himself to a yid, and one is if he sold himself to a goy. So the pasuk of Mekes Beknasa is speaking where he sold himself to a goy. So maybe Ashkan Eved Ivri nimkle v'kachavim hayol b'chol kinyan bekesef, because a guy only asks kesef. Nimkle Yisrael minolan. How do we know that if a guy sold himself to a yid, that if a yid sells himself to a yid, how do you know the yid could buy him with Kinyan Kessef? On that, it says v'hafta, meaning that he could redeem himself. And we learned that the way he redeems himself is through Giroin Kessef, through paying back prorated. So it must be that he was originally purchased with Kessef. But the problem is v'hafta is not speaking by a Eved Ivri. It's speaking by Amma Ivriya. Ashkan Amma Ivriya. So you've proven to me that an Amma Ivriya could be purchased with Kessef. Hoyel Mekacha b'Kessef. There's a svara to say that you could be kind of Amma Ivriya b'Kessef because when you're Mekadisher, you're Mekadisher with Kessef as well. Therefore, it's Mikna b'Kessef. But an Eved Ivri minolan. Once again, we can't learn it from when an Eved Ivri sells himself to a guy, and we can't learn it from when an Eved Ivri sells himself from when the Amma Ivriya gets sold. So once again, how do we know if an Eved Ivri sells himself to a yid? How do you know? Wow. How do you know that he's nikna b'Kessef? Amar Kra. Wow, tzaddik. Amar Kra, the pasuk tells us, "Yimacher lecha hachicha ha'ivri aya ivriya." If your brother is sold to you, either an Amma or an Eved, v'avatko sheishanim. So we see a hekesh here from an Eved Ivri to an Amma Ivriya. Makesh Ivri Ivriya. And therefore we know in Amma Ivriya from Behafta is niknas b'Kessef, using the hekesh of Eved Ivri to Amma Ivriya, we learn that an Eved Ivri is also niknas b'Kessef. Zok to Gemara, the case of Kiyimacha lecha achicha was referring to in Bezdin sold him. Ashkod machur Bezdin. We have now a raya that when Bezdin sells an Eved Ivri, Kinyan Kessef works. But maybe that's dafka when Bezdin sells him, Hoyel v'nimker bal karchai, since he is sold bal karchai, so he's more easily sold, and therefore even Kinyan Kessef works. But Mocha atzmai minolan. How do you know that if he sells himself, a Kinyan Kessef will work as well? For that, Dr. Gemara, Yalav schir. And Rashi tells us, where are the 2 psukim that say schir? It says schir by Moicher Atzmai, It says Kiyamach Achicha v'Nimkar, which is in Vayikra, and then it says Kischir Ketoishev Imach, and that's what it says by when someone sells himself. And then by Machur Bezdin it says Ki Mishne Schar Sacher Avaka Sheishanim. So we make a hekesh or Gzer Shava from a person selling himself to a person being sold by Bezdin. Just like a person being sold by Bezdin, Kinyan Kessef works, so too a person who sells himself as an Eved Ivri, the Kinyan Kessef works. Zok to Gemara, that's very good. Hanicha Lamandamar, Lamandiyalef Schir Schir. That's very good if you hold like the Tana who actually has such a Gzer Shav of Schir Schir. There's actually a Tana who does not hold of the Gzer Shav of Schir Schir. So according to him, Michael Maimer, how do you know that an Eved Ivri selling himself to a Yid could be nickness with Kinyan Kessef? Amakra, for that it says V'chi Sasig Moisef Al Union Rishon. The pasuk that discusses a Yid selling himself to a Goy starts off with V'chi Sasig, and it's right after the parsha that talks about a Yid selling himself. The Vav connects the parsha about a Yid selling himself to a Yid selling himself to a Goy. Moisef Al Union Rishon v'Yilmoid El Yom Mitachtoin. Just like we know that when a Yid sells himself to a Goy, Kinyan Kessef works, so too if a Yid sells himself to a Yid, Kessef will work. Beautiful. So now we have our makar, how we know that Kinyan Kessef works for an Eved Ivri. Sai when the Bezdin is selling him, Sai when he's selling himself to a Goy, and Sai when he's selling himself to a Yid. But you mentioned that there's a machlokes and there's somebody who doesn't have the Gzer Shava of Schir Schir. Uman Tana Loyal Schir Schir. Let's learn more about this. Who is that Tana who doesn't have the Gzer Shava of Schir Schir? Dr. Mar, hi Tanahu. It's the following Tanya. The Tanya we learned. Hamoicher Atzmoy. If one sells himself, Nimkar L'Sheish, V'Yeser Al Sheish. He sold for 6 years and more than 6 years. Why? That's if he made a Tnai Rashis. He has a right to say, I want to be sold for longer. But Machru Bezdin ain't Nimkar El L'Sheish. When Bezdin sells him, the maximum they'll ever sell him for is for 6 years. And that's the first Parsha Mishpatim that we know that talks about. Eved Ivri is when Bezdin sold him, he's only sold for 6 years. Another difference. If someone sells himself as an Eved, he cannot be Nirtza. Doesn't have this whole Parsha of Nirtza. Mechur Bezdin Nirtza. Once again, because that's in the Parsha Mishpatim, it's not in the Parsha Vayikra. Again, if someone sells himself, when he goes free, there's no halacha v'anoka that the Adon has to let him go with a lot of beautiful gifts. But once again, because the Parsha of Anoka is by the Parsha of Avodim in Devarim, and that's once again referring to Machur Bezdin. And the Moicher Atzmoi, Ein Rabbi Moshe L'Shivcha Knainis. In Mishpatim, the Torah talks about a person giving his Eved Ivri a Shivcha Knainis to make children with. But that's only in the Parsha of Machur Bezdin. But a Moicher Atzmoi, in that Parsha of Vayikra, doesn't mention anything about that. The Devar Moicher Atzmoi in Rabbi Moshe L'Shivcha Knainis, but Machur Bezdin, Rabbi Moshe L'Shivcha Knainis. Rabbi Eliezer says, Zev Zeh ein nimker el l'sheif. Sai an Eved Ivri that Bezdin sold, and Sai an Eved Ivri that sold himself, and nimker el l'sheif, and Zev Zeh nirtza, v'zev Zeh Nikolai, v'zev Zeh Rabbi Moshe L'Shivcha Knainis. They have the same halacha. They're mirrored. So let's suggest that the machlokes is totally if you have a Gzer Shav of Schir Schir, my la b'akamivli, the Tanakama loyal of Schir Schir, and therefore the halachas of an Eved Ivri who sells himself are different from an Eved Ivri that's sold by Bezdin. Rabbi Elazar Yalev Schir Schir, and Rabbi Elazar doesn't make that Gzer Shava, and therefore they share same halachas. Okay, it's already 7:51, so we will stop here, and we will be mamshich tomorrow, Be'ez Hashem, discussing this question of whether or not we have a Gzer Shava of Schir Schir, which is comparing Moicher Atzmoi to Machru Bezdin. Okay, have a wonderful, wonderful day. Shmuel, thank you very much for setting up the television, and in Mitzvah Shem, we will do the same tomorrow.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you so much.
Okay, have a good day.
Good day. Reb Shimon, have a wonderful day. Thank you.